Hi, my name's Henty. I'm an oil painter, and I want to briefly show you how I work in approaching the canvas and how I arrange the canvas to begin the image. I first of all start with a sketch, and in this case it's a sketch of Marilyn Monroe from the 7-Year Itch. And I'm going to bring it in a little closer for you, and you can see that with the image I have some directional lines that I developed to help me get some perspective on the canvas, and these circles may or may not develop into some spotlights to give some dark and light around the image. And right onto the canvas I start to transfer these directional lines. As you can see, here's the head, and I don't know how clearly you can see it, but there are some directional lines I'm starting to develop right here. Now I'm going to show you how I actually start to develop the drawing on the canvas, and then we'll move on to applying the paint. I oftentimes will hold my sketchbook or the actual photo that I created the sketch from, hold that with me while I do the transferring of the drawing onto the canvas. Here I am putting more of the directional lines on here. And after I do some drawing, I often put some more gesso over the drawing. And this gives a nice base when you start the oil painting. For the paint to adhere to the canvas. At this point, the drawing for the painting is about done. I've given Marilyn Monroe a mime mask for a face, and you can see that there are lines that are showing the outline of her figure, and also too there's circles for the possible spotlights, and plenty of directional lines to help with the perspective once I start applying the paint. Now, as you could see from before, the drawing on the canvas was practically done, and I don't get an exact drawing, but what I then do is I take a piece of compressed charcoal and I go over the drawing in many places, and in this instance we're looking at the face of the drawing, and you can see in these areas I've already gone over the drawing with a compressed charcoal. And with the compressed charcoal you can see it doesn't really smudge very much if you press it into the canvas with a sharp edge. Now I've outlined the whole work, practically the whole work now in charcoal, the compressed charcoal, and at this point I find as I'm working on the hair that I can feel a certain rhythm developing in the piece. The piece starts to take on a character of its own. And during Leonardo da Vinci's time, during the Renaissance, he developed techniques to define the image more using dark and light passages. And I find that using the charcoal very much helps me to define the shapes, but also too with the directional lines, I'm also starting to get a sense of where light and dark passages will appear in the work to help define the work and make certain parts of the work stand out and recede, and certain parts of the work come more in focus than others, which creates interest in the work. I like to use Gamblin paints and some of his other painting mediums to work. This is something called Gamsol, which also too they put out, which is a like a mineral spirits, but it also too, all of his products, Robert Gamblin's products, are very low in any kind of toxicity, which if you're working with oil paints a lot is I feel is very important, especially if you're working in a confined area. I just use paper plates to mix my paints up, and then in the end I can just throw them away. I don't have to clean and reuse a palette. And I use a variety of brushes. Mostly I use a long-handled brush, and for a canvas of this size, something typically like this, I might use a larger brush to initially to apply some of the paint, but I oftentimes start to work with a brush of this size to get some texture in the paint as I'm applying it. And the other thing too, which I like about this brush, this type of brush, is that there's a lot of bristle at the end of the brush, which allows me to pick up quite a bit of paint and apply it fairly thickly, which then allows me to move the paint around easily. And in certain areas I can deposit more paint and less paint and create different kinds of textures in the paint, which I like to do in the paintings. In the beginning of a painting, I'll usually apply a base coat, which goes on quite rapidly. And if some drips happen on the canvas, I usually don't worry